Board Member Moore.
Here.
Board Member Blake.
Here.
Board Member Cordova.
Present.
Vice Chair Walter.
Here.
Chair Folks.
We'll still call him even though he's not here. Okay.
Page 2 of the agenda, under adjournment, it says the next meeting will be April 12th, and it should be April 27th. The other item is under item 3, the 705L Patio, and it's under the staff report. And up at the top of the staff report, it says item number 4, and it should say item number 2. That's it.
You're talking about on the staff, the actual staff report in the body of the,
Correct. It's this page right there. Staff recommendation.
oh, it's this is item 1.
Yeah, we can just, base the order off the actual agenda as opposed to the report itself.
Got it. All right. All right, moving on to approval of minutes. Does anybody have any changes, comments, or anything from the minutes of the last meeting, February 23rd? All right. So can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I can make that motion to approve the minutes of February.
Hey, before you go forward, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Just reminded by our clerk, it's a little hard to hear because we got folks online. If you could just make the extra effort when you talk to speak to the microphone, would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of the February 22nd Preservation Board meeting.
All right. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
I
All right. Next item is the oral communications. This is the portion of the meeting reserved for individuals who would like to discuss, address the board on matters of community interest are not listed on the agenda. Is there anybody? Seeing nobody there, I will move on from that one. Moving on to board staff announcements. Anybody have any announcements?
No staff announcements.
Okay. Moving on to new business. Item 1, Mills Act audit review of ad hoc subcommittee formation and appointment. Daniel?
Yes, so this is a follow-up from the last meeting where the board discussed the potential creation of a additional single-member subcommittee to assist staff in completing the audit of the existing Mills Act contracts. So the resolution that is included in the packet would allow formation of that subcommittee, along with the requirements that would apply to it. And so that does require an action of the board to adopt the resolution, and then if adopted, a separate voice vote to appoint a member to this new subcommittee.
All right, what quick question on that is that last time we talked about this, we were actually talking about a subcommittee for looking at the finance side of it.
Correct.
And this talks about the audit in general. So is this still about doing the finance? And based on our conversation yesterday, do we need to do that if we're able to get those financial information?
Well, as we discussed before, we still have a need for someone to go through all the invoices and receipts and tabulate that data and then cross-compare it. So there will be some potential overlap, but that will occur via staff. So this would be a much more narrow focus, really just on the financial auditing side.
Yeah, because, and I'm speaking for you, Susan, you jump in. We were starting to do that process for those previous ones, and we can still do that. Was just the one part of it, that the financing part, that was kind of unclear to us because we're trying to figure out how to get that information. So I guess question for you, Susan, are you okay with we still do the review of those audits, or do we want to then shift that and we focus on the Mills Act component? And then Rob offered last time to jump in on the audit, but I think he was thinking it was more the financing side of it. And there's also other things of the audit that we have to look at.
If I could just clarify, when I'm using the word audit, I mean specifically verifying compliance with the existing contracts and their obligations under the work plans that were approved, not audit of the program at
Correct.
large. So just the
Correct.
existing contracts.
So
So
it's the 8 to 10
correct. Yeah. The
Mills Act
the seven,
contract that we have.
yeah. What is, yeah,
Before I-
distinct than the overview of the overall Mills Act program,
Correct.
which would still be in the purview of the existing Mills Act subcommittee.
Right, right. So I guess the question is the three of us, who wants to divvy up? Because we have the Mills Act contract component that we've been working on, and then we have the audit of those 8. And so this would then create a new subcommittee that would take those 8 audits from us to Rob, and then Rob would work on those, and we would stay with the subcommittee for the Mills Act contract.
Well, I guess my understanding from last meeting was that the intent of this new subcommittee would be to allow board member Cordaway to simply focus on the review of all those invoices, receipts that we've already assembled,
Okay,
tabulate it, and then we'll simply cross compare it to their property tax savings so we can inform the council of how much of that savings has actually been reinvested into these homes.
That was
And-
my understanding as well. I don't know if I'm speaking close enough to the mic. That's my understanding as well. Where I need help is crunching the numbers, and this gentleman graciously volunteered to help in that regard. I'm fine with continuing to do the audits for the 4 that I have. In fact, I think I've done most of the 4 as far as comparing the work plan items with the receipts for expenditures for the 4 properties that I have. But there's more to it than that, and I don't know what the next steps might be that I could be part of.
Well, I think the intent here is to kind of sever that part of it. So that would be taken away from the 2 of you, given to board member Cordaway. And so that would be now solely the focus of this new subcommittee. I mean, you've done the inspections of these existing homes. So we have all the photographs. So that part is done. I mean, this is really kind of just that last piece that we kind of need before we report back to the council.
Okay.
and I'm fine with that too.
Yes.
Rob, you're so inclined.
And I'm flexible to, whatever the scope is, whether it be crunching numbers or also looking at legal documents. I'm qualified, willing, and able. So
Okay.
So based on that, if there's any other questions, I don't know, Laura, if you have any questions or comments on this at all?
No, I think
Okay.
it should be well taken care of.
Okay. All right.
And I'll be happy for that.
So based on that, can I get a roll call for approval of this item?
Well, you would
We
need a,
have to adopt a resolution.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. We have to,
correct, a
where
motion.
is that? There's a discussion. So there is, there it is. Okay. So can I have somebody who's willing to make a motion to adopt the resolution that's in the documents?
I will make a motion to adopt the resolution forming a Mills Act Audit Review Ad Hoc Subcommittee and the appointment of 1 board member to serve on the Mills Act Audit Review Ad Hoc Subcommittee. Do I have
Well,
a
I guess a single motion is fine, but you need to identify the member.
Identify the member.
Say his name.
Yes, there he is. I'm sorry,
Yes.
Rob Courtway.
Perfect. Have a second?
I second that.
Okay. Now, can we have a roll call?
Board Member Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Blake,
Yes.
Board Member Cordaway,
yes,
Vice Chair Walter.
Yes.
Great.
All right. So that covers that. So now we are on to item 3, public hearing, 705 El Patio Drive, Tier 1 Historic Resource Alteration Permit.
So this is a continued public hearing for consideration of the request of Mr. Key to rescind the listing of the property at 705 El Patio Drive from the Historic Resource Inventory as a structure of merit. As discussed at the previous meetings, unpermitted alterations were made to this building. The city's historic architectural advisor, Mark Sandoval, prepared a report that it was previously provided and I believe also included again in today's materials that recommended that the city consider removing the property from the list because it no longer satisfies the criteria for inclusion on the city's local list or for the state registry. As noted from the last meeting, staff did want additional time to work with the legal counsel. We actually do have our city attorney here, Bill Seligman, to provide a revised resolution that would tie the action to recommend a rescission from the HRI subject to payment of a in lieu fee in lieu of restoration of actually restoring the house back to its historic state. So as noted in the materials in the report, the approach that we've taken is to identify the reasonable cost to actually restore this building to its previous state if that were an action that the city would have otherwise desired. And so we have estimates from Mr. Sandoval in terms of the soft costs for preparation of architectural drawings, and then a construction estimate from our acting building official in terms of the actual cost of construction based on industry standards. So the combination of those costs, less a reduction of 15% to account for some overlap, comes out to a value of $45,000. So we have the resolution that provides the legal basis tying that in lieu fee to city general plan policies in terms of protecting historic resources, as well as the city's obligations under the certified local government program to ensure that we maintain protections against those properties. In that regard, staff does recommend that these HPB recommend to the city council that the property be removed from the HRI subject to payment of a in lieu fee in the amount of $45,000. Thank you.
All right, so refresh my memory. At this point, we have questions for you before we open into the hearing. Okay. All right. Does anybody have questions for staff?
Not at this time.
Well, do those two go together or are they separate?
As structured, the action to remove the property would be contingent upon payment of the $45,000 in lieu fee. Now, the board is empowered to reduce the fee. If you feel the fee is not appropriate, you do not need to recommend to the council that payment of a fee is warranted. This is just a recommendation to the council. The Planning Commission will also be considering this matter and be providing an independent recommendation as well.
I have a request prior to us voting on what has been proposed. May I have an opportunity before that to make an alternate proposal, like a motion to vote on an alternate version of the solution that's being proposed?
Depending on the nature and scope of your revision, if it's something that requires further review or additional preparation of documents, the meeting may need to be continued. If it's a minor change, it could be read into the record.
It would be within the construct of the original proposal, just with a slight difference. Is now the time that it's okay to, so staff questions, our city attorney, is this time for those?
If you have questions of staff, this is the time.
Okay,
And then the public hearing will be open and you can hear from the homeowner as well as any members of the public, and then you can engage in discussion.
okay. I had a question for you. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm glad that we can talk about this here. My question is, it's very well documented, the laws, procedures, codes that we are using to rationalize making this proposal. We're calling it an in lieu fee. And to that point, I just have two questions. One, the construct that we have to calculate the calculus of this fee, has to do with the soft costs to design, engineering, to put the property back into its original state, plus the construction costs. My question is there precedent that that's the best way to do it? I mean, it kind of seems, it may be more art than science. I really wanted to hear kind of how that rationale came about. The other item is there legal precedent to create, I was going to say a law, but it is a zoning code text amendment in real time when there's a violation or when an action has been taken and government wants to penalize or at least create something that has a disincentive for future actions such as that. Is there precedent for that to be done and to impact what had happened in the past? So for example, the work was done at the time the work was done, this law did not exist, and now we're creating a law retroactively. And the example I give is we're watching a football game. They normally kick the field goal at a certain yard line, and then they decide to change the rules mid-game and move it back. And so that's my question. Is there precedent to, in arrears, create a rule that's enforced backwards?
Well, let me address those first in order. To address your first question, has this ever been done in the present context? Not that I am aware of. However, there is ample law to support imposition of an ad hoc fee. The law exists. We're not creating new law here. There is state statutes that expressly allow the imposition of in lieu fees and development impact fees, which is essentially what we are using in this instance. And you can do that in an ad hoc manner, meaning you don't have to adopt a new rule of law. The law exists. What we're doing is saying that it applies in this situation where somebody has essentially removed a city resource, a historical resource from the city, and is now asking for a permit from this group, asking essentially to legalize that action after the fact, but essentially asking to remove that property from the historic inventory, which is a discretionary action ultimately by the city council upon recommendation of this body and the planning commission. And in exercise of that discretion, it is accepted and recognized legal practice that you can condition a permit such as that. And one of the things you can do by way of a condition is impose a fee subject to the existing statutory structure.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that, that question was being asked. So appreciate that.
I
I
have a
just would like
question.
to note that we do have Mr. Sandoval online, should the board have any
Okay.
questions, Ben.
Great, thank you.
I do have a question. I am all in support of Campbell caring for its history. That's why I've been on the board since 1990, and you've been here equally as long as I have and longer. And we've seen an awful lot of things happen, and plenty of people have said they don't want to have a historic house, and we've let them off the list just because they said they didn't want to have one. That's, if we're going to set a new precedent, let's set a new precedent. I'm all for that. But $45,000 to me as a fine for this doesn't seem reasonable or fair or encouraging of doing preservation work. I would love to see us encourage preservation. I personally would like to see us have a Mills Act available for anybody who has a historic house that wants it, because it is a venue to save your history. And that's what we're looking to do, save our history. And we have very little of it left. And it goes all the time. And if somebody buys a house and says, I didn't want it to be historic, and we just let them off the list. So I'm having a problem with this because of how we have behaved in the past as well. So I would love to see us move forward and, take a swift actions with things, but not just on one person. I would like to see it for our entire list. I would like to see us go through the list and give the city an idea of what, if half the houses on the inventory chose to do Mills Act preservation, what would that cost the city? And I would like to see us move forward in trying to protect our historic inventory, which it always comes up. And it's here again, and I would like to see some discussion on that.
Just
if I-
real
if I may
fast.
ask real quick. So right now we're asking the staff questions. So do you
Yeah.
have specific questions? Your statements were great and we should
Yeah.
bring those back up afterwards when we have a discussion of it. But do you have something specific for them related to
actions
those?
are just that we have allowed people to remove their house from being historic, even though it is historic. I just don't know how that fits in.
My comment was the same, just Robert Rules of Order. My advice, whatever discretion you have to recommend to the Plan Commission Board, go with it. But Robert Rules of Orders, I just ask questions now. And then once you get all the evidence, which includes the testimony of the people online and the applicant, then start your deliberations and recommendations.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. So I did have another question. I know in the report it talks about similar cities have the fines, whether it's San Francisco, Burlingame, et cetera. Do you have ideas of what they were charging for similar situations, just so we have a kind of a backstory of sorts?
So that's going to be a different discussion. So
Okay.
that really has to do with amending the city's historic preservation ordinance to codify much more stringent fines. So this is a fee.
Right.
A fine would be a much higher value number to strongly disincentivize removal or unpermitted demolition or alteration of a structure on the list. And so that's kind of the longer term issue. And we will be seeking city council authorization to prepare an update to the ordinance. But absent that ability right now, this is the best way forward, we believe.
And this calculation methodology will be the precedent going forward.
Well, ideally, this should not occur again, because in the future, we will have a codified fine structure that then would, if needed, would be used to deal with the issue.
All right, any more questions for staff? All right, so at this point, I'm going to open it up for public discussion. So if the applicant would like to speak, so I see a lot of names on the screen over there, so it could be a lengthy time. So we're requesting that you have 5 minutes to discuss so that we can have time for everybody to speak, and then we'll move on from there.
That seems brief for what we're discussing today. I'd like to have more than 5 minutes to discuss my points. We've got over half an hour left.
Yeah, the rules are the applicant gets 5 minutes, public gets 3 minutes. So we need to stick to the guidelines, please.
I hadn't seen the 5-minute rule. Okay. Well, let's go at lightning speed then. So obviously 2 components of what we're here to discuss today in terms of the proposed resolution. One, we've discussed at length before. I will be brief in reiterating those points because I think the matter of rescission is important, and summarizing those points is beneficial for all of you to get aligned with what we're talking about today. So obviously, number one, despite my honest intentions, I broke some rules. That's not up for debate. I think there is probably a learning experience here, which we're all kind of broaching the subject of in terms of that earlier conversation, which is perhaps the HPB can get more involved with historic preservation at even the community level. Something for further discussion. I was not educated to any of this when I bought my historic house. Maybe something to be done for that later. The current status, as summarized by Mark Sandoval with quotes in his report stating the historic integrity of my property has been significantly diminished. He goes on to say, if integrity has been lost, it can no longer convey historic significance. He says, regardless of potential reconstruction efforts, where we've talked about replicating effectively what was there previously, the historic value will not be re-added. Also considering the future work, so what was already done, as well as in the future, that will further remove any historical value from the home, which is, in my opinion, a bit paradoxical from what I came to the board originally for, which is guidance on how to add on to my home, which he's saying will actually just diminish the historic value. And obviously mentions that it does not meet the quality or the qualifications in terms of the National Register criteria. The city has said it is ineligible for continued listing on the HRI. They have said maintaining a property without historical integrity undermines the importance of this list and dilutes the importance of other historic houses. My conclusion here for you in terms of rescission is, again, humbly, that I will provide my best intentions with my future addition endeavor to maintain the aesthetic while still providing value to my family and my neighborhood. think that's a reasonable compromise that we could get to together here. The second component of your decision today is obviously the fee, which you've begun to discuss already. I would absolutely echo Laura's points in terms of my extreme concern for the precedent that's being set here, which the city attorney has already mentioned. There was no previous precedent, although there is law at a state level that can supersede local law. How am I, how is a guy like me, a community member, supposed to know not only to study Campbell code, but also study state code or national code in order to avoid these penalties retroactively? I think, as community members yourselves, you should also be a bit outraged and concerned at the fact that really a penalty can be imposed, which is not made known to, me as a consumer. We already discussed the matter of the potential precedent of removing me from the list, rescinding. Again, I think there's already been action taken and there will be taken, in the future by the city council in order to adjust the city ordinance and municipal code to allow for an actual disincentive that is on paper. As I think what we're talking about today is a much more dangerous precedent where the city can effectively, charge penalties that were not made aware to the public prior. If we take a real life example of this, something that all of us are guilty of in the past, perhaps we were speeding in our car on the way to a doctor's appointment, something that we've all done. We made a conscious decision in our mind, knowing the current laws or the current penalties associated with speeding. And we made a decision weighing the risk versus reward in order to speed to save ourselves time, right? We made the decision that reward outweighed the risk. I did not have the ability to do that here. I have already been charged for the penalties that the code allows. I have not been told what the risks were when I made my decision. That is, I think, again, extremely dangerous. And to be pulled over for a speeding ticket, go to court and be sentenced to life in jail is outrageous. It's ridiculous. I don't think any of you would be in support of that type of thing. That's exactly what it feels like is being imposed on me here today. And, frankly, again, I likely would have changed my decision in terms of work that I did to my property had I known the potential penalties involved with it, or had I even been aware that what I was doing was against the rules. I think in a society, we should be afforded that right. The risk factors can obviously be elevated in the code at a later date, as we've already talked about. I don't have the time to go through the quotes that were provided. I think that's worthwhile talking about because I've been cut off.
Yep. So from this point, is there anybody else in the community who would like to speak? Do we want to ask him questions or go through the community first? Everybody else?
Ask him questions now.
Okay.
I do think, given the gravity of the situation, that we're talking about charging a citizen $45,000, that we give him a little bit more time to speak. He's got a lot at stake here. 3 more minutes.
Everybody okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
You now know how I feel about the fee at a very high level, just at the notion itself. I think in regards to the actual quote that was provided, there's a large disalignment, I think, or unalignment rather, from what things actually cost versus what the quotes were that provide.
You're
That
okay.
was a quick 3. When we look at the spreadsheet provided by the building official, 25 grand worth of costs, I can tell you when I did the work that I did not pay $25,000. It stands to reason I would not be charged $25,000 by workers, materials, all of that type of thing in the future. $12,000 to restucco the front of a house is ridiculous. That would be about $3,000 worth of work. Don't have time to go into more detail. I think knowing what the scope of work is that is outlined in the spreadsheet, which is effectively, again, restuccoing, putting new 2x4s on the columns to make them look like columns again, and the new windows. I mean, the amount proposed by Mark Sandoval, and apologies if I offend you here because you're here live, in $28,000 to supervise restuccoing and adding new windows also ridiculous from an architect standpoint. I've already hired an architect to add on over 500 square feet of new construction to the back of my house. It was not even half that cost. So understanding the logic that you guys are making in order to arrive at the fee that you did, I would not pay those fees when I inevitably have autonomy to hire my own people to supervise this effort. So the $45K in itself is ridiculous. I think the $3,500 that he has proposed in terms of the administrative fees, which include a new historic evaluation of the home, if that's something that is necessary to make this happen, I'm happy to pay that. I think that's reasonable, as well as what other fees come with updating the DPR form. Again, administratively to accomplish this, removing it from the list. Those are reasonable costs of doing business. That would be my recommendation. I would strongly urge the board to make a motion to rescind my property from the list based on the evidence that we've talked about for a $3,500 fine.
All right. Anybody have questions for the applicant?
Not me.
Okay, I don't have any myself. So if there are members of the public that want to speak.
Hello, board. Can I make a comment?
If the public would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand.
Hello, can I make a comment?
I don't see. Who is it?
What is your name?
Vincent Cortinas, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Hello,
Okay, go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, so my house was also deemed historic around the same time as the Keys house. The city never disclosed to us that we could potentially be fined for improving our house. You know, I feel that knowing what I know now, I would have asked the city not to put my house on the list. I'm shocked that this man is being potentially fined $45,000 for trying to preserve his house. And did anyone actually see the house that he improved? The house was dilapidated. It was an embarrassment to the neighborhood. It was a terrible house. This man should be given a certificate, an award for doing the work he did to the house. It improved the neighborhood so much. And to fine him is, I believe, ridiculous.
Thank you. Are you done?
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public that wants to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was just wondering, for historic houses and such, is there a conditional effect on these houses? Because, I mean, I've seen houses on the outside, how they look, and is there regulations, and are you guys going after these houses that aren't upkept and not maybe falling apart or not doing well as a historic house? Is that a concern for you guys in this community or council?
I'm sorry, I can't hear most of the people speaking.
Can you turn your microphone up a little bit, sir, who just spoke?
Yeah, I was wondering, your historic buildings, are there like a guideline, a baseline of appearance, aesthetics, functionality of your historic buildings?
So are you
Yes.
asking if there's a guideline that we apply when we're reviewing properties that come to this board?
For the upkeep of your properties, I know that he made additional upgrades and so forth, or preserving his property. Are you guys doing the opposite for that end? People that are not doing that stuff and not taking care of your historic buildings?
We don't engage in a Q&A during public comments, sir. So you may provide your feedback to the board and they can take it into consideration.
All right, anybody else?
Can you state your name for the record?
There was a direct question by the gentleman who spoke first as to whether any of us visited the house and actually looked at it. We've disclosed that in prior meetings that I did visit, and Susan, you did as well.
Yes, and we visited these houses when we were working with them years ago to bring them on the HR inventory.
I have another question.
Excuse me. Oh, wait.
I'm sorry. Did the city ever disclose to potential candidates that they could be fined for doing work on their house? Because my house was deemed historic and I never received any such notification.
Again, we do not engage in question and answers as part of public comment. You can provide your comment to the board and they can take it into account.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to clarify that when I visited the applicant's house, it was prior to this situation. I was specifically looking at when he was talking about doing the addition to the back of his property. So that's when I went, visited you and met you out on the street.
Looks like we have two more properties that want to speak, or public wants to speak.
Tim O'Connell, would you like to speak?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, we.
Yeah, just a quick comment in support of the Keys with the appearance of their house from before compared to what it looks like now, that it is a complete improvement to the neighborhood. Before it looked very similar to a rundown shack, not anything that looked presentable for a neighborhood, not anything that, aside from repair or remodel value and sheer square footage of the lot, would I think anybody would be overly interested in displaying the front of the house that was on it before. And with it being at the entrance to, or at least at a corner of the neighborhood, it's pretty readily seen. And I think that the improvements that have been done to the exterior of the house, not only have they improved the value of the house, but also the overall appearance of the neighborhood, to where other houses that may need attention, whether it be through neighborhood upkeep teams or however it is, with not following cleanliness of their house, their yards, run down houses in the neighborhood that draw attention and potentially crime. And yet this house has become one of the showcase model houses on the street, yet it still preserves the characteristic and historic nature of the house. I'm not a member of the organization myself, so I couldn't speak to it in great detail. But as far as keeping the aesthetic appearance in the Spanish colonial type, and I may be misquoting what type of architecture, but it looks like it stays true to it and improved it rather than detracted from it or removed it. In regards to a fine of that amount, as stated by pretty much everybody else, that fine not only feels excessive, but overly punitive for something that seems that it could have been handled a bit differently. So I don't think a fine of that amount should be charged for anything, let alone trying to improve the neighborhood or one's house that they're trying to make better for their family and for the neighborhood. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Charlotte and Tammy, would you like to speak?
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, sorry if there's any background noise. My name is Tammy Saw. My husband and I actually own two homes in the same neighborhood. And I also am going to reiterate that I am shocked that the Keys are being charged $45,000 for increasing the value of all of our homes, making this neighborhood much more desirable just by the sheer aesthetic of their homes. Like Mr. O'Connell had mentioned, the home is in a location in which it is readily viewed by anyone who accesses this neighborhood. And before we moved here in 2015, we didn't know anything about this neighborhood. This neighborhood had a hard time selling our home because nobody knew it was tucked back here. And now the values are astronomical. The Keys home is one of the reasons that is, because it draws such attention in such a positive way. And I can tell you that when we did buy our first home here, that the Keys home prior to them purchasing it and fixing it up was actually one of the reasons we almost did not purchase the home here and did not want to live in this neighborhood, because it was such an eyesore and it was directly in the sight line of anyone who entered the neighborhood. So I do absolutely think that he should not be charged $45,000, which is astronomical, for the improvement in the neighborhood and the improvement in Campbell home prices in general.
Thank you.
That's it. Mhm.
Nobody else? Okay, so at this moment, unless there's more questions for the applicant, I'm going to close the hearing. Bring it back to the board for discussion. All right, who wants to start?
I think the commentary that we heard from the residents on Zoom here is something that we probably all had in our mind. And it's a conundrum we face here, right? Maintaining the historical integrity is a great concept, and it's kind of what our charge is. But it's also, seems illogical to disincentivize making a place look nicer. This is a conundrum that there's so many gray areas, and it's a difficult situation. And just the optimal, or the most reflective of that, being the house that we're talking about now. And I just wanted to go down on record saying that it's a worthwhile discussion sometime in the future, whether that be with city council here, figuring out which historic preservation laws, whether we follow the current city guidelines or state, federal, that we add some nuance there, because the fact of the matter is, if you look at the before and after pictures, it's a much nicer looking house. That said, if you follow certain rules, they break the superstructure has been modified. I've already stated, and I appreciate the city attorney being here to talk about legal precedent. It's still, I can't disagree with the notion that it's the right thing to do to, retroactively penalize somebody for doing something that they didn't know what the penalty would be for. It's a precept of the laws of economics and law itself, that if you are taking action, you understand the implications of that action. That's incentive. That's what makes the economy run. That's what makes many things run. And I don't think there's a gray area there. I think that's a difficult pill to swallow. I think we can all agree finally that this is definitely a gray area. And to just say, think how this looks from the outside. Guy improves his house, gets charged $45,000. But there's so much more nuance to it. So I have those are the points I wanted to bring out there. It's the incentivizing and the economic precepts that are involved with this. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, if I can just ask Rob on top of that, is that, do you have, because you were talking about it earlier, about some ideas of how you want to modify this. So if you're not willing to agree with the fee, do you have another idea, whether it's a lower fee, no fee? Do you have, part of this discussion is we have to come up with the end result here at the end and tell Daniel and everybody whether we agree, disagree, what we want to change, because it's going to go to planning, it's going to go to the city council. And with that note, I also want to make sure we're all clear, is as an architect myself, yes, his house looks beautiful, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the fact that there was a home that was on the HRI. It was altered, now is being removed. So there was, however you want to say it, something at fault happened, whether he was willingly knew about it, unwillingly, something happens, we have to address that. But I totally agree. His house is charming and beautiful and looks great. Yes, it may increase their values, everything, but we're not talking about a house that wasn't on the list, that was ugly, and he came and made it beautiful. And so now we're going to charge him because he had this rundown house that you could demo and then made it pretty. The issue is that he took something, a resource from the city. And that's our charge, is to retain these resources so we don't lose them, just like Laura said earlier, but also doing them in a polite and a helpful manner for both the city as well as the community. So with that said, I don't know if you have a notion in terms of no fee, less fee, and I'm going to ask everybody that same thing, because we got to come to a final conclusion here before we leave to make this decision of what we're going to do. But do you have an idea of what you would think you'd like to see that we change on this resolution at all?
I appreciate you asking that question and keeping the conversation on track, that, we have a charge, and whether something's fair or not, that's possibly outside of the context. My recommendation would be to charge a lower amount, because it feels like what has been come up with results in a number. The calculus comes up with a number that I believe is excessively punitive.
Okay.
One thing that we have discussed is, and Nick has admitted to this, yep, made a mistake. And, what I've always talked about is incentive and providing disincentives. And absolutely, something should be put in place that creates a disincentive, because $275 does not provide a disincentive. So my answer to that is somewhere between $275 and $45,000. And I would be irresponsible to just come up with a number like that.
Sure.
So, and not that I'm one to drag things on,
Right.
but I think more thought needs to come into play.
Sure. And we're still going to have further discussion, so we don't have to have a final
Right.
number right this second, but I at least wanted to get your take on it. And I'm going to lean to you guys and have you weigh in on what you think as well.
I would like to see us have a stronger preservation board. And I would like to see some sort of a fine for this to set a precedent so that we can go forward and do this appropriately. We have not done what we needed to do with our historic properties, and which has left a door open for this to happen. I think when someone buys a house on the historic resource inventory, they need to get even a pamphlet about what their obligation to that historic home is, even briefly. I do think of minimal, something to set precedent, and then to work on our homework and get it proper. We need to protect our historic resource inventory properly, and we need to get it done.
Thoughts?
Oh, goodness. This is a very complicated issue for me. Our city has CLG status. That's a certified local government status. And with knowing that, we are to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for design and rehabilitation to protect the homes that we have that are on the inventory, whether it's an inventory property or in the historic district or a landmark property. And in this particular situation, the changes that were made are the opposite of what should have happened in terms of permission to get it, getting recommendations, using the design guidelines. It's unfortunate that there was not communication between this applicant and the city, but I don't know what could have happened that didn't happen in that regard. When he purchased the home, we were not, I don't know that the city was aware that this person had purchased this house. It was between him and the realtor. And it's my understanding that realtors in our county have an obligation to make it known to the buyer that they are purchasing a home that is on the historic inventory. And we have, for the last few years, done outreach countywide to realtors, encouraging them to do that. Whether or not they do it, I have no idea. But we certainly give them plenty of information, flyers, trifold brochures to get them involved in the process. In this particular situation, I do believe that we should require the applicant to pay an in lieu of fee to get authorization to get off the inventory. Whether or not it should be $45,000, I don't know that. I'm not able to say yes or no. It does seem like a lot of money. And perhaps there's a compromise that we can reach in that regard. Or I'm wondering, and perhaps I should frame this as a question, should we adopt a resolution and ask the Planning Commission and the City Council to be the ones to decide how much the fee will be? I don't know that.
As structured, I mean, the recommendation that would move forward to the city council is contingent on payment of an in lieu fee. So it does require some recommendation of a specific value.
An amount.
Yeah, of an amount.
Okay.
And on that note, I was going to ask, when we make the recommendation, if planning commission agrees or disagrees, or a city council agrees to disagree to a recommendation, then what would happen? Or let's say disagrees. What happens at that point?
Well, the city council will take into account the board's recommendation and planning commission's recommendation, and then they can do what they believe is appropriate.
Right.
So they can
could
charge no
change the
fee.
Yeah, they could change the fee. So if we say, let's lower it to 20,000, they may say, no, we want to do 10, or they may want to push it back up to 45. I mean, it's really still the, we're an advisory board. So this is not the end all be all of our decision here. It's what our recommendation is. So there's going to be further discussion. So I say that only because, not that I want us to do a shotgun approach to this, but also this is the third meeting or more that we've had on this. And if we push it out, it's just going to keep going. All the information is here. We have all of it. I think we have to kind of come with a recommendation and let the rest of the other boards in the city council weigh in. So by the time it gets to the city council, it's had many people vetting it. And then by that time, whatever fee is will be the final appropriate fee that everybody has weighed into it. So for myself, I'm in the same boat with you, Susan, that I think there should be some fee. Yes, 45,000 seems like a lot. I would be, if I was in the same boat, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm getting $45,000. I have to pay for this and whatever. So one question I had is in the payment, it talks about where that payment would go and what it would serve. Is there a lesser payment that would still accomplish and help our whole process? Because in the end, this money is going to be earmarked for items related to HBB. Is that correct? Or does it go to the general fund?
No, so the money would be earmarked to further the city's historic preservation program, as directed by the city council.
Right. Okay. So I throw this out loud as terms of from all the years that we've been working on the board, some people have been working on the board a little longer than others. Is there something that would benefit and help us to help the community over the next 5 years, that whatever fee that is, that then would benefit, whether it's more campaigning, marketing, helping out the community so they can see that, hey, yes, he paid a fee, but we're using it to good cause to help promote what we're trying to achieve here, et cetera, et cetera. That might be a lesser amount that seems amicable for us, the property owner, and the community, because they're all going to hear this. They're all seeing it right now. And they're going to find out, oh, we charged them 15,000, 20, whatever it may be, that we would all feel more comfortable about to help out.
Well,
Are we charging a fee for removing the house from the inventory? Is that what it is?
Correct. It's as it is a condition of approval of his request to remove the property from the inventory.
On what basis have we allowed people in the past to remove their houses from the inventory?
Well, in the time I've been here, no property has been removed from the inventory. My recollection that the properties in the past that had been removed had already been altered. On a similar situation, then
Had a homeowner that bought a house and didn't want it on the list. It was a new one.
and her request was denied ultimately by the city council. City council denied that request and directed her to work with staff to see if we could.
It was on Second Street. It was on Second Street.
It was a long,
Well, there's been a mixture of ones. We've had ones where they've come in and they've actually asked us that they want to remove it and we denied it. There've been ones that were removed because the house disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
So we had no choice because it had to be removed. And we've had ones that come in and that been requested it. And that was back in when the city council was pushing for an opt-in, opt-out process. And so we had to then change our approach to things of how we did it. So there were some properties, again, there haven't been a lot. I mean, of the 102 or 20 we have, I can maybe remember 4 or 5 over the last 12 years I've been on the board or so. That's been a mixture of ones that's happening.
I have a thought on this because we're talking about identifying this as a fee to remove the house from the inventory. If you look through the write-up that was done for today, that I believe our city attorney did, we see words like penalties, fines, like punitive language. So really then what is the purpose of this fee, of this money? Is it just, an administrative thing to take it off the list, or is it a penalty?
It's both. This would be my understanding.
To be technical, it is not a penalty. It is an in lieu fee to compensate the city for the loss of a historic asset that will be used to further the historic preservation program. In effect, it may function as a penalty with regard to the person paying it, but that is not the actual intent of the fee.
Correct. And just also reiterate, as known in the staff report, the city is a certified local government. Next meeting, the board will review the annual report that we need to submit to the state. And one of the questions they ask is, did you remove any properties from the list and why? And so this will help bolster the reasoning that, yes, we removed a property from the list for this reason. However, that came subject to an in lieu fee in lieu of restoration because the city determined that forcing him to restore the property to its previous condition was ill-advised. So instead of that, we took a monetary value that's comparable to that restoration cost. And that again, the city does have an obligation to support and preserve the historic resources of the city.
Yeah.
And I may add, is related to this, Susan and I are on the subcommittee for the Mills Act contract suggested modifications. And this will be one thing that we're going to include is again, our recommendation that would go to planning and city council, how we address situations like this moving forward as well. So we don't lose any more homes without due process.
right.
And so whether it's a fee in lieu fee, a penalty, whatever, those are going to be recommendations that we include that moving forward. From a fee standpoint, again, that'll be more derived by the city council and staff of what that fee would be moving forward in the future. We're going to be just providing the kind of the framework of our recommendation.
I like that. I know that we need to have some teeth in our list, in our ordinance. We need to have that. So we need to do something to let people know we don't have that many homes left, and we have determined these to be the ones. If you purchase this home, you also purchase this obligation of preservation. I mean, it's got to be there.
Correct. All right, so we're somewhere between $275.
Or
That's-
$27.50. I can't remember. what he said.
275. That was the
low end.
the fee. Well, it was the fee that they've already paid.
The law that was in place when the action actually took place.
Right.
Ah,
245. Yeah, that was the fee from building, administrative, et cetera, to $45,000 as a fee. Does anybody have anywhere between that as a starting point? And I know it's somewhat arbitrary because we're trying to put it a number with something that seems appropriate. And that's why I brought up the point about this, where the money is going to go.
Yeah.
It's supposed to help promote and help other people down the road in terms of marketing, whatever, whatnot.
Yeah, if you look specifically at page 4 of 5,
item D in Daniel's report. It says the imposition of the in lieu fee would be in support of the city's obligations to the certified local government program as provided in Appendix G, the certified local government application and procedures in August of 1999. The city obligated to enforce appropriate state and local legislation. And he goes on to say that let's see, under item E, there is a reasonable relationship between the fees use and the rescission request on which the fee is imposed, and the amount of $45,000 is a conservative approximation of the cost to restore the subject property. There's just so many things that we need to take into consideration here. I think that what Daniel was suggesting the money would be used for is in support of historic preservation. And I think that's a good idea. What it would be specifically used for that. But what I don't know is what would be the appropriate fee in lieu of fee. I'm going to suggest that $5,000 be considered.
And I was going to add actually a motion, or was that adding a motion to vote for? I want to make sure I'm keeping within
We
the.
haven't got there
It's
yet.
not
We're
a
just
motion.
we're still
Okay,
still
okay.
discussion.
It's just
No
a
one's
suggestion.
made a motion
It's
yet.
just a
Right.
discussion.
And what I was going to say is in the interest of, respecting the process and understanding that city council can then take our recommendation into what they will, right? We make recommendations, but in the interest of keeping the process moving along and not holding up the process, here's a man who's trying to add on, make some changes to his home so he can have another baby. We don't want to get in the middle of that, right? And so also keeping in mind that we all have agreed that 45,000, and it's completely subjective, right? It just doesn't feel right, but we've all said it doesn't feel right. And I realize law and not feeling right, apologies. I was going to propose making a motion to charge the fee of 3,500 because that's what the kind of the value, the administrative stuff would be to do this. If you want to make it 5, that's adding maybe a little bit of science to it, but I could go with 5,000 as well. This is all really this was just a way, I think, a good way of, as Mr. Sandoval put in his email, that's the evaluation costs, the filing stuff. That's one way to do it.
Right.
So that would be my proposal, but I wouldn't be against 5,000, but I'd be against 45,000.
Sure. And on that note, I was going to ask Daniel that 3,500 for Mark Sandoval, that was to do his report to put it back. If it went back onto the historic.
Correct.
After the repairs, then he would have to do a $3,500 fee for doing his report to then put everything back in place onto the inventory, correct?
Correct. It would be an updated DPR form that he quoted $3,500 for.
Right. So with that, my suggestion would be at minimum would be 3,500 for that to cover those costs, which the applicant said he was reasonable to see that one, plus something more, whether it's enough to get to 5,000, that then would cover other administrative costs, our time here today, city staff, et cetera, as well as just moving down the road. There's going to be fees for us to help, like I said, with the community. So I might suggest that somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 for that. Maybe it's $8,000 that then covers Mark's and then gives us roughly 5,000 or so. That would then be helping with the education and other components.
Yes, I mean, if you're looking for kind of a basis to put those numbers to, the acting building officials estimate quotes permit cost on the planning side, $500, and building permit costs of $1,500. So between planning and building, you have $2,000 of permit fees added to Mr. Sandoval's estimate for a new DPR form. That brings you to $5,500.
5,500. And then, so if we went to 8,000, then that would be some reserve that would then help out the process for the board and the community interaction, things like that.
The only thing I'll add, and our attorney can weigh in, I mean, you have the ability to, there's substantial evidence in the record to require a fee up to, I can't remember the number, 45,000. It doesn't have to be exact science. There's a variety of numbers in here you could latch on to. It's good to put in the record the rationale so the commission and the council knows where you're going. But I'm not sure if you want to get too hung up on trying to pick and choose between certain numbers within the itemization.
So I look to my board members here in terms of somebody making a motion. And so we can then have this either further discussion or a vote, knowing all of what we know now.
I will make a motion to go back to the $5,000 amount that Susan had suggested, because I think it points it out as an issue. It allows us to move forward and do something about that without being overly punitive, but to realize how important our historic resources are and how we need to continue to do what it takes to preserve them and to allow the public to understand as well what it means to protect a historic resource.
I'll second that motion.
There we go. So we need to do, yeah, so you have to do full,
Oh,
you have to read the whole thing and then change the language in there.
What
right
do I
now.
have to read?
You go to,
First, you have to adopt the resolution and then make a motion. Okay.
Would like to adopt a resolution recommending that. and
make sure you
make a
speak in the
motion.
microphone.
Oh, thank you. I would like to adopt a resolution recommending that the city rescind the designation of 705 El Patio Drive as a structure of merit from the City of Campbell Historic Resource Inventory, subject to payment of an in lieu fee of property restoration of $5,000. And is that it?
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
So I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second that motion.
Okay. So I have a second. I have roll call.
Board Member Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Blake,
Yes.
Board Member Cordaway. So
Yes.
sorry. Vice Chair Walter.
Yes. Okay. So as noted, this will then go to the Planning Commission and the City Council for final approval. And for Planning Commission, is there anybody, I know in the past in some of these items, can't remember what it was called, the SARC? Is this a SARC related item that I would need to attend that?
No, so the board's role in the SARC is really limited to proposals that the planning commission considers that affect an historic resource, which this doesn't directly in that sense.
Do you have rough approximation of when it would go to planning and to city council so that the property owner knows about those dates?
Yes, I was actually working on dates this afternoon. So we're tentatively looking at a May 10th planning commission meeting followed by a June 21st city council meeting.
Great. Thank you. Okay. All right. So that moving on to old business, Mills Act ad hoc subcommittee report and program update discussion. If you want to speak on this or you want me to speak on it?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so Susan and I did meet this week to further enhance our outline of the recommended changes to the Mills Act contract, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're further developing it and we will be submitting a packet of our recommendations over the next few weeks with the idea to bring it to the board for further review, hopefully at the next April meeting. I do want to ask that that we make sure that everybody's here. So if Mike is available, is going to be here, great. If for whatever reason, if not, then I would suggest we move it. I'll still send it to you, Daniel, so it can be distributed to everybody. But then I'd rather wait till everybody's here so we have time to discuss it and look at it. And obviously, one of those components will be an item in here, like we mentioned earlier, about in lieu fees, et cetera, related to similar situations of today's.
Would you like to meet ahead of that meeting between the three of us?
We can, or maybe let's send it to you. You take a look at it. Again, it's more bullet point items. I took the kind of the outline document I created last year and just put the new date and kind of added some verbiage of what we're suggesting. And then we've got some forms and outlines and other things to go back with it. Our thought, when I was talking to Susan, my suggestion was that right now we're not doing full write-up of every section. It's kind of big picture items so that we all can discuss it and see what we agree, disagree, what we want to change. And then there's further discussion with you as to how much detail we need to get into it. Because I presume with the city council lawyer being here, that there's going to be a lot of legal components of any revisions that need to be implemented before it would go to city council for their review. So we just have a further discussion about how much wordsmithing we need to do at this point, once we kind of get the baseline set up.
Yes, I mean, just in terms of the overall approach as well. I mean, the city council has not made the Mills Act update a formal work plan for our department.
Right.
So, but thinking out loud, at some point, once we finish the audit of the existing contracts, we do need to go back and check in with the council. And so part of that process, we can also just include some additional supplemental materials to just advise the council what the subcommittee's been working on. And then at that point, they can determine in the next budget cycle whether or not to add this as a work plan item.
Exactly. And that's why I suggest that we don't go into a lot of wordsmithing at this time, because
exactly,
it may be another year or two before it becomes work plan and there might be a lot of changes, but just getting the big picture items of what we think should be
What
changed.
our priorities
Yeah.
are, what in the research that we've done thus far.
Right.
Because we've been doing a lot of research with best practices for what other cities do, and the county provides us with some information as well. So we will have a lot to share when and if we have that meeting. I have a question concerning whether or not the historic preservation ordinance will need to be updated to include the in lieu of fees. I think it should be in the ordinance.
Yes, so that is something that we will be seeking council authorization when this matter reaches them. We actually have something comparable in our tree protection ordinance.
Yeah.
So if you remove a tree, we actually value the cost of the tree based on the established formula from the International Society of Arborists. So we have charged tens of thousands of dollars for removal of a tree without a permit. And that very much does serve as a disincentive. And so that's what some other cities have taken that approach, because they've run into the same problem that we do. I mean, we have a mechanism to deal with properties that are in disrepair, because that's an ongoing issue. And you can, eventually get people to stop and fix their property. But here, once the deed is done, it's done. So certainly need to have a much stronger disincentive. And we'll certainly need to explore that in much more detail later. And that'll be kind of a higher priority item beyond the Mills Act. And as part of that, we'll likely also need to tighten the permitting requirements as well. As part of this process, we found there's some gray area that is not ideal.
When we're talking about an in lieu of fee, is that for removing a house from the inventory?
Well, no, so this, the in lieu fee is just this particular application, but in
Okay.
the process, in the future, it will be a fine. And that would be for work that's done without a permit or an illegal demolition.
So it will not be this amount. We can come up with a method of arriving at a fine.
Correct. So that will be a codified method
Good.
and likely just administratively assessed.
Okay.
And it won't be us providing that.
Good.
It'll be the city. Just like in right now, there's an application fee for the Mills Act, which is like $1,500 and
Yeah.
change. We've
Right.
left that as is. So when moving forward, city council
Yeah.
staff can decide, is the application fee adequate? They want to change it, as well
Cover
as
the
the penalty fee,
Good.
those things. We're just saying, yes, we agree that something should be implemented. And then
Yes,
the
I
legal
would like
side
to
will
see
take over
those
and
teeth
decide what
in
that
it.
cost would be. Okay. Any other questions on the Mills Act Subcommittee?
I'll just note that Bill did provide me a notice of non-renewal.
Yes.
So we'll be working
Thank
to get
you.
that, we'll be working to get those signed and then
Thank you.
record all the Mills Act agreements.
Oh, you're talking about the three
The
current
three existing
places?
agreements,
Oh, okay.
That's
I
been
see
kind
them
of.
on the street and they go, got any news?
I know.
Not yet, hang on.
So unfortunately, we've been unable to record the agreements. We've had some difficulty tracking down and notice a non-renewal template. So we eventually had to have Bill create one from scratch. Apparently, it's not a very common tool that's employed. Because this way, those existing, the new contracts that were approved will expire out in 10 years.
Okay, so I was gonna ask, that's how it's set up right now.
Exactly.
Okay.
And as was voted on earlier with the audit subcommittee team of one, I'll contact you is maybe next week or later this
Yeah.
week to get the details.
I'll
of-
follow up with you and
Yeah.
I'll provide the materials that we have.
I look forward to that. And thank you, Bill, by the way, for coming here. It was very helpful to have you here.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for
Happy
coming.
to have you
Yeah,
here.
exactly. All right, unless there's anything else, I will adjourn our meeting till the April 27th.
Yeah, well, we ended single family zoning, destroying downtown.